You know, that tiny skeleton, the Atacama skeleton, the
Uh,
one they found in the Chilean desert, I remember for a while there, the internet was just convinced it was an alien.
oh, yeah. Those pictures were everywhere.
Everywhere.
Tiny little thing, strange skull.
Right.
People said it had ribs that looked different from ours. I
Uh-huh.
mean, I could see why people jumped to conclusions.
Oh, yeah, you and me both.
Yeah.
But you're here to help us, sort through the facts and the fiction, right? We wanted to get the real story, so we dug into the research paper that was published in Genome Research
Oh, wow.
by the scientists who actually analyzed its DNA.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, that's where it gets interesting.
okay,
They shut down the alien theory
okay,
completely.
yeah.
But what they found is actually way cooler.
Okay, so first things first, alien or no alien?
Definitely not an alien.
Okay,
The DNA makes it absolutely clear the skeleton is 100% human.
okay.
It's a girl, probably Chilean, with some European ancestry.
Uh-huh.
And get this, she lived just a few hundred years ago.
Wait, what? I thought they said it was ancient, like thousands of years old.
Yeah, the initial age estimates were way off,
Really?
which of course just, fueled all the mystery and speculation.
Right.
It's amazing how much just a wrong date can throw things off.
Totally. So, if she wasn't an alien, then what about all the unusual physical features? What was going on there?
Well, that's where things take a turn from science fiction to, like, real-life medical mystery.
Okay.
So the analysis revealed she had a bunch of rare genetic mutations.
Mm-hmm.
And these mutations directly affected how her bones developed.
Okay.
That's likely why, she was so small and had all those other skeletal differences.
Hold on. So we're not talking about some undiscovered species. This was a genetic condition.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is why this research is so important.
Okay.
By studying these mutations, scientists can learn more about how bones grow and develop.
Right.
That could be huge for diagnosing and treating similar conditions.
Wow. So from alien rumors to potential medical breakthroughs.
Right.
It really shows you how wild speculation can be.
Yeah.
But before we get too deep into the science, I have to ask, how did the skeleton even end up in the hands of researchers? I feel like there's a whole other story there.
Oh, you're right, there is.
Uh-huh.
It's a little messy, to be honest.
Okay.
The journey of this skeleton from the Atacama Desert to a lab
Yeah.
involves several different owners and even a documentary that, let's just say it really played up the whole alien angle.
Yeah, it sounds like something straight out of an Indiana Jones movie,
Right.
minus the aliens, of course. But with all that hype surrounding it, how did the scientists even approach studying it ethically?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it highlights a really important point. The
Mhm.
scientists who did this genetic analysis, they never actually had the whole skeleton in their hand.
Oh, really?
They were only given a tiny sample of bone to work with.
Really? Just a tiny sample. That's incredible. So how could they learn so much from so little?
Yeah. Well, that's the power of DNA analysis these days.
Yeah.
But it's also important to point out that even though they didn't have the entire skeleton,
Yeah.
they were really upfront about the ethical concerns involved. So they were advocating for responsible treatment even while they were doing the research.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In fact, they specifically said that the skeleton should be returned to Chile
Wow.
and treated with respect, like any human remains should be.
Right.
They knew this whole discovery was sensitive,
Yeah.
especially since people were trying to profit off of it and its, supposed alien origins.
It really makes you think about how we treat remains, especially ones that are unusual.
Right.
It's not just about science, it's about human dignity, too.
Exactly. And it raises this really interesting question. What if, instead of all this alien hype, the skeleton had been studied the right way from the beginning?
Oh, wow, yeah.
Imagine what we could have learned
Yeah.
and how much more respectful it would have been.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get back to the science. You mentioned those genetic mutations.
Oh, yeah.
What can you tell me about them?
Well, when they analyzed her DNA, they found multiple mutations in genes that are known to be involved in skeletal development.
Okay.
Some of these mutations were already linked to known skeletal disorders,
Uh-huh.
but some of them were completely new to science.
So a mix of the familiar and the totally unknown? That must have been exciting for the researchers.
Absolutely. It's like finding a missing puzzle piece.
Right.
These new mutations could help us figure out the incredibly complex process of how our bones grow and develop.
Yeah.
Imagine the potential for diagnosing and treating skeletal dysplasias.
Okay.
This could be groundbreaking.
So we're talking about conditions like dwarfism.
That's one example. Some of the mutations found in the Atacama skeleton are associated with dwarfism. Others relate to conditions that affect the rib cage, the skull,
Oh, wow.
and even facial features. And it's important to remember, it's the combination of all these mutations that led to her unique appearance.
Oh,
So one tiny skeleton can give us so much information, not just about that individual, but about human biology as a whole. It's
It
amazing.
really is. And in this case, it's not just about understanding what caused her skeletal differences. It's
Mhm.
about what it teaches us about the whole spectrum of human variation.
Okay, but let's step back for a second. Why should people care about the genetics of a skeleton found all the way in the Atacama Desert?
Well, remember, we all share the same basic genetic blueprint.
Right.
Studying variations, even really rare ones like this, helps us understand how complex and resilient human development is.
Hmm.
It's like taking a peek under the hood of what makes us human.
It's like each individual genome is its own unique story.
Yeah.
And the more stories we read, the better we understand the whole human narrative, right?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And sometimes even the tiniest details can reveal incredible truths about who we are and where we come from.
We talked about the ethical side of things earlier, the researchers calling for repatriation and all. But what does this case mean for genetic research as a whole, especially when we're dealing with human remains?
It's a big question and a crucial one. We're living in a time where genetic analysis is becoming more powerful and accessible.
Yeah.
It's really important that we have clear ethical guidelines,
Hmm.
especially when studying human remains. We need to ensure respect, sensitivity, and responsible use of this information.
It's a tough balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pursuing knowledge while also treating human remains with dignity.
Absolutely. It's a conversation that needs to involve everyone, scientists, ethicists, indigenous communities, and the public. These
Right.
discoveries affect all of us, after all.
Okay, so we've gone from aliens to genetics to the ethical side of research. It's amazing how one skeleton can take us on such a journey.
It just shows the power of scientific curiosity and the importance of approaching these discoveries with both rigor and respect.
You know, I keep thinking about how the researchers never even saw the whole skeleton. Just a tiny bone sample. Does that limit what they could learn?
That's a really good point. Well, DNA analysis can tell us a lot.
Right.
Having the whole skeleton would have allowed for a much more complete anatomical analysis.
So there might be even more to discover if the skeleton were studied as a whole.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Being able to examine the skeletal structure in detail could give us an even better understanding of how those genetic mutations played out physically.
It makes you wonder what other secrets this little skeleton might hold,
Mm.
and how important it is to preserve it and study it respectfully in the future.
It really highlights how interconnected science, ethics, and cultural heritage are.
And it reminds us that sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries are right here on Earth, hidden within our own DNA. So we started with this wild alien theory and ended up talking about human genetics and ethics and treating human remains with respect. Feels like we've come full circle.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of why it's so important to, approach these discoveries with a critical eye.
Right.
We need to look beyond those attention-grabbing headlines,
Right.
dig into the actual scientific evidence and consider the bigger picture.
Yeah, because sometimes the truth is way more interesting than fiction.
Exactly. And in this case, the truth is that this small skeleton, while definitely unique, tells a very human story.
Right.
It's a story about genetic variation and the challenges some people face,
Mm-hmm.
and how scientific knowledge can help us understand and maybe even overcome those challenges.
Yeah, and it really highlights how important it is to get the science right.
Right.
Not just for the sake of knowledge, but for the people and communities involved.
Absolutely.
Right.
There's a real responsibility to make sure research is done ethically with sensitivity to cultural beliefs and practices, especially when we're dealing with human remains.
So what does all of this mean for you, the listener? Why should this story about a tiny skeleton found halfway across the world matter to you?
Well, I think it speaks to that shared humanity that connects us all. The genetic code that shaped this girl with all its variations and complexities is the same code that shapes each and every one of us. Her story reminds us that we're all part of this vast and intricate web of life, and that even the smallest discoveries can have a huge impact on how we understand ourselves and our place in the world.
Yeah, and it reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge should always go hand in hand with compassion and respect, especially when that knowledge comes from the remains of another human being.
Here's something to think about. What if, instead of being exploited for its perceived weirdness, this skeleton had been studied ethically from the beginning, maybe in collaboration with Chilean scientists and indigenous communities? What could we have learned, and how might it have changed our understanding of both science and history?
That really makes you think, doesn't it? Sometimes the most important lessons aren't found in the answers, but in the questions we ask. So as you go about your day, I encourage you to keep asking questions, to look beyond the surface, and to remember that even in this age of incredible technological advancements, the human story is still the most compelling narrative of all.
And never underestimate the power of a single skeleton to challenge our assumptions, spark our curiosity, and remind us of the beauty and complexity of life on Earth.